Have you observed those people who seem to walk through chaos as if protected by an invisible field? Think about them for a moment. While everyone around them panics, they maintain an almost mysterious serenity. A project fails. They maintain peace. An unfair criticism arises. They remain centered. A devastating loss happens. They suffer but are not destroyed. The world falls apart. They remain whole. What do these people possess that seems so rare? What inner quality allows them to navigate the storms of life without being swallowed by them? It's not that these people don't feel. They feel deeply, perhaps even more deeply than most. The difference is that they've discovered a secret that Carl Jung, one of the greatest explorers of the human psyche, dedicated his life to unveiling. True freedom doesn't come from controlling the exterior, but from transforming the interior. Today we're going to explore the path to this freedom, a journey that promises to not only change how you respond to the world, but how you exist in it. In Jungian psychology, there's a fascinating phenomenon called identification. It's when we confuse who we really are with our experiences, thoughts, or emotions. Think about how this happens in daily life. Someone says something cruel, and suddenly, you're not just a person hearing cruel words, you are those words. You become the offense, a plan goes wrong, and you're not just someone experiencing a setback, you become the failure. A relationship ends, and you're not just going through a separation. You are the abandonment, rejection personified. This identification creates an extraordinary vulnerability. Each external event gains the power to define who you are, as if your identity were a boat adrift in an ocean of random circumstances. Jung realized that this was the primordial source of human suffering, not the events themselves, but our tendency to allow these events to define our essence. Remember the last time someone said something that really got to you? What happened in that moment? It was probably not just a passing thought. It was as if something had penetrated the core of your being. Your heart raced, your emotions flared, your whole body responded. Why? Because in that moment, you weren't just experiencing words. You completely identified with them. Jung wrote extensively about how this automatic identification is the central mechanism through which the external world gains power over us. It's not the events that control us. It's our identification with them. To understand how to free ourselves from this trap, we need to understand a crucial distinction that Jung elaborated in his work. The difference between what he called the persona and the true self. The persona, Jung explained, is the social mask we wear. It's the identity built by external opinions, social validations, and cultural expectations. We develop this mask from childhood, learning which behaviors are rewarded and which are punished. Be a good boy. Girls shouldn't behave like that. Successful people act this way. To be accepted, you must be dressy. All these messages form layers of acquired identity. The persona is not inherently negative. Jung recognized that it's necessary to navigate the social world. The problem arises when we confuse this mask with our true being. The authentic self, on the other hand, is something much deeper. It's the organizing center of the psyche, which transcends momentary experience. Jung described it as the archetype of totality, the center and circumference of the psyche. It's the consciousness that observes, not the content being observed. When we live exclusively from the persona, we're vulnerable to every fluctuation of the external world. A criticism becomes devastating because it threatens the fragile structure we believe ourselves to be. A professional failure becomes a sentence on our worth as human beings. A relationship that ends seems to annihilate our capacity to be loved. The persona is like a house of cards, impressive when standing, but ready to collapse at the slightest breath. But when we connect with the authentic self, we discover something extraordinary, a dimension of our existence that remains intact, no matter what happens externally. It's like discovering that beyond all the waves and storms on the ocean's surface, there exists a depth where the water remains undisturbed. For Jung, the path to this freedom inevitably passed through the most challenging territory of the psyche, what he called the shadow. The shadow is not an abstract or metaphorical concept. It's a deep psychological reality that contains everything. we reject in ourselves, our unrecognized fears, insecurities, desires, and impulses that we consider unacceptable. It's everything we push into the unconscious because it doesn't align with the image we have of ourselves or with the social expectations we've internalized. I would never be capable of being so selfish. I would never feel envy toward a friend. I don't have aggressive impulses. I'm not the type of person who feels anger. These denials, made with the best intentions, create a growing deposit of unprocessed psychic material. The problem, as Jung discovered in his clinical work, is that the unconscious is not really a passive storage space. It's energetically active, and what we deny internally we inevitably encounter externally through the mechanism he called projection. Projection is like a cinema projector that casts internal images onto the screen of the external world. It's an automatic and unconscious process. We don't choose to project. It happens before we even have a chance to realize it. This is where the true magic of freedom begins to reveal itself. When something or someone disturbs us intensely, irritates us beyond reason, or affects us disproportionately to the situation, it's not a random accident. It's a precise revelation about what we haven't yet integrated in ourselves. Let's make this concrete. That arrogant person we can't stand, we're probably projecting our own unrecognized arrogance. That co-worker whose ambition deeply irritates us, they may be revealing our own repressed ambition. That characteristic in a partner that seemed so attractive at the beginning of the relationship and now constantly bothers us. It's often an aspect of ourselves that we admire but don't allow ourselves to express. That rejection that completely shatters us. It's revealing where we still reject ourselves. Jung observed in his writings, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This is not an abstract, poetic, or philosophical statement. It's a practical map to freedom. Think about your most intense reactions from last week. Which people or situations triggered a disproportionate emotional response in you? These are not random interferences. They are precise signals pointing to unintegrated aspects of your psyche. When we begin to see our reactions as messengers instead of inconveniences, the entire external world transforms into a perfectly calibrated mirror for our inner evolution. The process that Jung called individuation represents the heart of his contribution to depth psychology. It's not just another theoretical concept, it's a map for the human journey towards psychological integrity. Individuation, in the Jungian view, is the process by which we integrate all the fragmented aspects of the psyche into a coherent whole. It's reclaiming the parts of ourselves that we abandoned along the way in our effort to adapt to external expectations. This is deep inner work, not a quick self-help technique or an instant solution to emotional problems. Jung was clear that this process takes time, courage, and a commitment to inner truth. The individuation journey involves fundamental psychological movements that transform our relationship with ourselves and with the world. It begins with the recognition that our projections are valuable messengers from the unconscious. When we learn to see that our intense reactions are not about others, but about unrecognized aspects of ourselves, a new territory opens up. This path invites us to accept those aspects that we have long rejected, bringing to consciousness parts we considered unacceptable, shameful, or threatening. It's a process of psychic reintegration where we recognize that we are more complex and multifaceted than we imagined. Jung spoke of the need to integrate polarities within us, our light and our shadow, our inner masculine and feminine, animus and anima, our conscious and unconscious aspects. This integration frees us from the tyranny of opposites and the internal fragmentation that makes us vulnerable to external influences. As we advance on this journey, we naturally begin to differentiate ourselves from the limiting identifications we've accumulated. We learn to separate our sense of self from the stories, roles, and identities we've adopted throughout life, recognizing that we are both more and less than all these external definitions. The deepest work of individuation puts us in conscious relationship with what Jung called the archetypes of the collective unconscious, those universal patterns that shape our experience beyond personal history. And ultimately, it leads us to develop a living relationship with the self, the organizing center of the total psyche that transcends and includes the ego. Jung considered this a natural process of psychological development, not something artificial or forced. Just as a seed contains the pattern to become a complete tree, our psyche contains a natural impulse toward wholeness. However, Jung observed that modern society often impedes this natural process, rewarding conformity and specialization instead of integrity and authenticity. As we advance on the path of individuation, something extraordinary begins to happen. External triggers gradually begin to lose their power over us. Not because the external world changes, people will continue to be difficult, challenges will continue to arise, but because our relationship with these experiences fundamentally transforms. Think about it. When someone criticizes an aspect that we've already accepted in ourselves, where is the blow? When a plan fails but our identity isn't built on external successes, where is the devastation? When someone rejects us but we don't reject ourselves, where is the deep wound? This is the liberating paradox. The more we integrate rejected aspects of ourselves, the less the external world can negatively affect us. Not because we become insensitive, but because we become more complete. The psychological autonomy that Jung envisioned represents a radically different state of being from what many of us know in our everyday experience. But it's crucial to understand what this autonomy really means and what it doesn't mean. This autonomy is not an absence of feelings. It's not an emotional armor that blocks out the world. It's not a form of cold detachment or stoic indifference. Jung was deeply critical of any approach that tried to transcend the human condition by denying it. On the contrary, Jungian psychological autonomy is a complete and integrated presence that can contain the full range of human experience without being dominated by it. It's the ability to feel deeply without being swallowed by feelings, to think clearly without being held hostage by thoughts, to respond to the world without automatically reacting to it. It's a fundamental shift in orientation, from living in constant reaction to the external world to living from a stable and authentic internal center. We could compare this shift to the difference between being a leaf carried by the wind, spinning and changing direction with each new gust, and being a rooted tree that moves with the wind but remains fundamentally stable at its base. When Jung spoke about this autonomy, he was describing a state of expanded consciousness where we are able to contain paradoxes and polarities without being torn apart by them. It's important to demystify what this psychological autonomy is not, as there are many misconceptions. Achieving this integration doesn't mean becoming immune to pain. Pain continues to be an important and necessary part of human experience. It doesn't mean becoming disconnected from emotions. On the contrary, emotions are often experienced with greater fullness and richness when we're not identified with them. It doesn't mean distancing oneself from shared humanity. Connection becomes more authentic, not less. It doesn't mean being free from challenges. Challenges continue to arise as a natural part of life. And it certainly doesn't mean achieving some kind of perfection in responses. Growth continues to be an ongoing process throughout life. What this autonomy really brings us is a deepened awareness of our habitual reactive patterns, allowing us to recognize them before they take over us. It develops the ability to identify projections at the moment they arise, instead of days or years later in retrospect. It makes us less identified with passing thoughts and emotions, recognizing them as events in consciousness, not as definers of who we are. This autonomy gradually frees us from automatic identifications with external roles that so limit our potential. Perhaps most importantly, it empowers us to choose conscious responses instead of being controlled by automatic, unconscious reactions. It anchors us in a sense of identity that transcends external circumstances, keeping us open to constant transformation, without losing the internal continuity that gives us stability. Jung observed in his patients that as they advanced in the process of individuation, they didn't become less human or less emotional. On the contrary, they often became more vividly present in their lives, but with a new capacity to navigate the complexities of human existence without being destroyed by them. A concrete example Imagine receiving harsh criticism from someone important to you. The non-individuated response would be total identification. I am terrible. Defensive. Reaction, you are wrong. Or emotional collapse. The response from psychological autonomy would be the ability to hear the criticism, feel the emotional impact, discern what might be true in it, recognize possible projections, both yours and the other person's, and respond from a place of integrity instead of reactivity. This is the radical freedom that Jung pointed to, not an escape from the world and its challenges, but an authentic engagement with it from a place of deep inner integrity. A fundamental practical aspect in the Jungian journey towards psychological autonomy is the development of what we can call the internal observer or inner witness. This observer represents a capacity for consciousness that many of us rarely exercise in daily life. It's the ability to witness our internal experiences, thoughts, emotions, sensations, impulses, instead of being completely absorbed and identified with them. This faculty of consciousness allows us to create a space between stimulus and response, between what happens and how we react. In practice, the internal observer works like this. When an intense emotion like anger arises, instead of completely merging with the emotion, I am anger, the observer can notice, I am experiencing anger at this moment. When a self-critical thought appears, I am a failure, the observer recognizes, I'm having a self-critical thought, instead of accepting the thought as an absolute truth about your identity. When a painful memory emerges, instead of reliving the trauma as if it were happening now, the observer perceives, I am remembering something difficult that happened. This small shift in the position of consciousness, this subtle grammatical shift in how we relate to our internal experience, represents an enormous psychological transformation. It's literally the difference between being the storm and being the sky that contains the storm. In Jungian terms, we can understand the development of this observer as the strengthening of the ego in its healthiest function, not the inflated ego that seeks control, but the ego as an organizing center of consciousness that can mediate between different aspects of the psyche. To develop this capacity, Jung often recommended practices such as journal writing, attention to dreams, active meditation with internal images, and what he called active confrontation with the unconscious, all methods to strengthen this observing faculty. It's important to understand that this internal observer is not cold or detached in the negative sense. It doesn't judge. It doesn't try to suppress or control the experience. It doesn't criticize or overanalyze. It simply witnesses with clarity and compassion, creating a space where we can own our experiences instead of being owned by them. With constant practice, this capacity for internal observation can become our anchor amid emotional storms, our refuge in moments of intensity, not to escape the experience, but to fully contain it without being overwhelmed by it. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to face your worst emotional trigger, that person or situation that normally completely destabilizes you. But this time, with this observing capacity intact, you would still feel the impact, but you would no longer be totally defined by it. At the end of this journey through the depths of Jungian psychology, we arrive at a transformative understanding of what it means to be truly free. The freedom that Jung offers us is not a position of superiority in relation to the world or its storms. It's not a promise that you will never again be challenged, hurt, or confronted with difficulties. It's not an exit door from the human condition, but a deeper entrance into it. It's a freedom that we paradoxically find in the heart of these same storms, the ability to be fully present for the entire human experience without being defined or limited by it. It's recognizing that your true nature is vaster than any passing experience, deeper than any temporary emotion, more stable than any external circumstance. When you understand this not just intellectually, but as a lived reality, something extraordinary happens. No one and nothing more has the power to affect who you really are. Not because you've become indifferent, but because you've discovered a dimension of existence that remains intact even amid life's greatest turbulences. This is the freedom that Jung invites us to discover, not out there, but in the deepest part of our being. A freedom that doesn't deny our challenges, but transcends and includes them in the great journey of becoming who we truly are.